There's an ongoing mystery that planners and urban historians have been trying to solve for over 100 years. It began when European colonists began founding cities in North America. They generally imported two street patterns. The first kind is the disorganized medieval street pattern, typical of cities that weren't designed with a prearranged master plan. Boston is a great example of this. The other common pattern coming across the Atlantic is the grid. This pattern has been used by colonizers since at least the ancient Greeks. It's rational, expandable, and founders can spice it up with something like a central square or diagonal boulevard or two. There was a third street pattern that appeared in the colonies, one that didn't become popular like the medieval streets or the grid. This pattern, consisting of small neighborhood units surrounding squares, only really appeared in Savannah, Georgia. The designer of this pattern, James Oglethorpe, had no prior experience designing cities. How did an amateur planner forego centuries of established city design and implement a pattern that resulted in one of the most charming, walkable historic centers in the United States? For many, it's just too hard to believe that he designed it out of thin air. There must have been an obvious precedent. Scholars have been searching for this precedent to solve this mystery since the 1800s. We'll get to the theories the scholars have developed in a minute, but first I want to talk about why the Savannah plan is so amazing, because it might not be obvious. Savannah's historic plan features a repeating ward design, each with a square at the center. Let's take a look at the design of one ward. A ward consists of 40 lots in tithing blocks, each lot about 60 by 90 feet. These lots were intended for the new colonists to build their homes on. At 60 feet wide, they were wider than many of the lots in the New World, due to Oglethorpe wanting to prevent the spread of fire from house to house. Oglethorpe designed 4 trust lots for civic buildings. Civic buildings were not needed on every trust lot, so they became de facto commercial lots, though some homes are on trust lots and some businesses are in tithing lots. The main attraction for each ward is the central square, today filled with trees, greenery, and statues. The entire ward is woven together with narrow, pedestrian-scale streets. The ward system creates human-scale, mixed-use neighborhoods that are rare and desired today. The other useful part of this design scheme is its modularity. Oglethorpe laid out the first 4 squares, but later leaders continued to follow the ward plan and laid out 24 wards with 24 civic squares. Today, 22 squares remain. No other city in the United States has a large area with so many public squares laid out in regular intervals. It makes for a wonderful urban environment. I highly recommend you check it out if you get a chance. Now that the plan is almost 300 years old, the entire area features mature trees and lovely historic architecture. Okay, so Savannah is pretty great, but researchers don't think Oglethorpe came up with the plan out of the blue. He had never designed a city before. He had to have found inspiration somewhere else. But where? Researchers have put forth many theories, and I'm going to go through 3 that I think are the most interesting. Let's start with number 1, the City of London. Oglethorpe was British and was a member of Parliament, meaning he had first-hand knowledge of London. In the year 1666, a massive fire destroyed over 400 acres of central London, burning 13,000 homes and nearly all of its civic buildings and churches. Some reformers and designers thought the government should not rebuild the cramped and congested medieval street pattern, and instead build something in the modern Baroque style. Famous architect Christopher Wren proposed the most famous reimagining of London, featuring wide boulevards, but others did as well. Here's a rather bland plan by Richard Newcourt, but one that obviously resembles the multitude of squares in Savannah. This is Oglethorpe's inspiration, right? Well, it's almost certain that he would have seen Wren's plan, and it's likely that he would have seen Newcourt's as well, but there's no verifiable proof that he did, such as a mention of it in his notes. And besides, there are other theories that are at least as good as this one. Some scholars believe that his inspiration came from military camps. Oglethorpe briefly served under Prince Eugene of Savoy during the Austro-Turkish War of 1716 to 1718. In addition, his father was a career military officer, and though he died when young James was only 5, Oglethorpe would have had access to his books on military procedure. He most certainly would have learned about the best way for armies to set up camp for the night, including this one by Cesare d'Avoli in 1586. This plan, designed to be next to a river just like Savannah, consists of 48 blocks with squares in the middle, marked as P on the map. A few years later, an Englishman, Robert Barrett, published a work called The Theory and Practice of Modern Wars and included a diagram of another riverside army encampment. Again, the idea here is a series of wards with central squares, similar to the Savannah plan. This basic mini-squares concept was used in ancient Rome and recommended by Machiavelli. But why would Oglethorpe want to use a military precedent for a new city? Well, one of Oglethorpe's primary worries when founding Savannah was attack from the Spanish in Florida. He may well have designed Savannah to resemble a military camp, but took the idea further and imagined them being turned into park-like squares once the threat had passed. Now that's a plausible theory, but maybe you're not convinced that he would use military tactics when designing a city, something that no one else had really done before. What if he just modified previous plans for the Georgia colony instead? Before Oglethorpe, Sir Robert Montgomery received permission to settle the area between Florida and Carolina. In 1717, he drafted a plan for what he called the Margravate of Azilia. The city is the square at the center, with 1 square mile farm plot surrounding it. The proportion of square to city blocks is similar to Oglethorpe's wards, though larger in scale. Oglethorpe certainly would have reviewed Montgomery's plans after he failed to raise money for colonization and lost the rights to settle there. Oglethorpe may have been inspired by the plan and simply shrunk down the city plan and repeated it. Oglethorpe did include 50-acre farm plots outside the city's wards, just as Montgomery included 1 square mile farm plots, so other similarities exist too. So which theory is right? Where did Oglethorpe get his inspiration? What if it wasn't any one theory, but instead he considered many sources, including those suggested in this video? He'd probably seen all of them. Maybe he did what we would today call remixing, taking old ideas and combining them into something new. Oglethorpe then had the bravery to implement a hybrid, untested street pattern, and thank goodness he did, otherwise we would not have the beautiful city of Savannah, and planning scholars wouldn't have this mystery to solve. Thanks for watching. If historic city plans interest you, let me recommend one of my favorite books, The Making of Urban America by John Reps. At over 500 pages, this thing will keep you busy poring over historic city maps. I'll put a link to it in the description below. In one of my nerdier moments, I had John Reps sign a copy of this for me when I took his urban history class. That's how much I love this book. And if you're interested in street patterns, check out my video on why so many cities in the United States have gridded streets.